Hi, I'm David Mandy. I'm working with Ken Atchity to advise veterans on how to reinvent themselves and be in control of their own story. Dr. Atchity is a Fulbright professor of American culture. He's been amazingly prolific throughout his career, helping writers publish hundreds of stories. He's published over 20 books on his own and produced over 30 feature films. The tenacity of Atchity is legendary. Rejection has never stopped him. He wants to share some of his wisdom, strategies, and optimism with you. He wants to help veterans of all ages find a career path, which means doing what you really want to do. He helped me become an entrepreneur, which really means believing in yourself when no one else does. We all need coaching and encouragement. Dr. Atchity is uniquely qualified to be your guide, a flashlight to show you the way. And on that note, I want to turn the call directly over to Ken.
David, thank you for this introduction and for encouraging me to do these webinars in particular, because it's a great way of reaching out, especially in the crazy times we live in, which I believe is going to change our whole way of life, as a matter of fact, with the power of the internet to put people face to face. As David said, I believe truly that the universe we live in every day consists not of atoms, but of stories. Just about everything we humans do, from first dates to going to a jury trial and listening to which attorney do you believe, whose story do you believe, which story makes the most sense, to watching a hamburger commercial or a prescription, a medical commercial, to a political campaign where we listen to the stories of the various candidates, to buying a car where we listen to the salesman and ask ourselves, do I believe his story or not? We're all concerned about stories. If an alien showed up on your front porch, your first question would be, hey, what's your story? What's your story? And he'd want to know what our story is. During your service years, you lived and told someone else's story. And you served that story, even if you didn't believe it. That was your role. That was your job. One of the biggest sacrifices you made in your military career was your personal story. Now, for the rest of your life, though, your challenge is to figure out your story, get it straight, and make it happen. Make your story come true. For most of my life, as David said too, I work with folks to help them do just that. Whether you're a relatively recent vet from Afghanistan or Iraq, or whether you've served in Vietnam, it's still time for you to take control of your story, time to review practical strategy and tactics for reinvention. And the great thing about this country, as my grandfather always told me, is you can always start over again. That's the wonderful thing. There are no penalties for failure. But first, you might want to know a little bit about what my story is. I grew up at American Legion and VFW events because my father in the service was an NCO who within a year and a half rose to be a captain on Eisenhower's staff in London, and then in Paris, and then finally in Berlin. He came back to his hometown in Kansas City to land a job with two brothers he'd met in Europe, and he never lost his respect and affection and gratitude for the service that helped him buy his first house and that helped him get the camaraderie a man needs in life and got him through the best of times and the worst of times. When he lost his job 17 years later, he ended up being helped by other veterans to find a new job that kept him going for the rest of his life. I never personally got the opportunity to serve this great country of ours, but because I was married and had two kids when Vietnam was an issue. But I never forget what the service did for my father and how much it meant to him to help in his transition. So what I did all my life was change careers, first from a government communications engineer to a professor of communications and literature with the Yale PhD, then to being a literary manager and producer. As David said, I've done a bunch of movies, including The Meg, which grossed $600 million at the box office last year. And recently I helped raise money for a great war story, 1917. I've done books, and one of my books is a story about quitting your day job and living out your dreams. And one time in my transition, in a transition of mine from being a totally secure professor to being completely insecure producer, I went with 3 other people. And more memorable than my interview was one of a man who was 94 at the time of the show. He had been an attorney only for, I think, 12 years. At the age of 81 or so, he was standing in the registration line to register for law school at Loyola. And one of the younger people behind him finally tapped him on his shoulder and said, "Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" He turned around and said to him, "Young man, what line should I be in?" And I love that because it's a perfect example of this country's freedom to find the right line for yourself and get in it. Or if you can't find the right line, then you make your own line. Because after the search for right livelihood begins in your imagination. You've got to really think about it so that you live out the truth that everyone's first career is an accident, but your second career is the mighty purpose that makes your life worth living. And you need to think about what would really make you happy. That work, that right work, gets rid of anxieties and moods and all kinds of troubling conditions. If it's the right work, it makes you happy. As the Zen koan says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. For enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. There's a man who loves his work. Whether you have a job already that you hate, or whether you don't have a job at all, where you are right now is a bridge to a better future. And we want to help you get to the other side of that bridge, beginning with your everyday attitude. I once gave a class at UCLA called Keeping Your Spirits Up, and most of the people in one of my classes, one session of that class were female actresses. And we went around the circle. I said, let's go around, identify yourself, tell me your name, where you're from, and what is the one question that you hear in Los Angeles that you hate the most, and how do you answer it? And the first woman said that she was from Detroit, and that the question she hated the most was, when are you going to move back to Detroit and work for the post office? I can imagine how bad that was, and I told her, this class will help you, I guarantee you. The second actress, however, said that she was from Philadelphia, and the question that she hated the most was, what have you been in big lately that I've seen? And her answer was the Pacific Ocean. And I love that woman because she had already done her homework. She knew what she was going to be up against in public, and she had an answer for it because she'd thought through her situation. She had gone through the practical mechanics of figuring out an answer in advance, because I asked the other woman, and what do you do when you get that answer about moving back to Detroit? And she said, well, usually I burst into tears and leave the room. And I said, well, we got to fix that. There's better ways to do it. And here comes this woman with a better example of, she's already figured it out. She says the Pacific Ocean, she gets a big laugh. And that is what we want to do here, is to arm you with ways to get down to it. But let's look at some of the situations you may be facing. Are you hearing voices in your head? Normally people do, depending on your situation. They can be worse or not so bad. But people do hear different voices. One is the voice of the reasonable accountant in your mind. My father was an accountant. One is the voice of the dreamer in your mind, the visionary. And one of them is what I call the managing editor, which I need you to help rediscover. Because if you don't rediscover the managing editor, you won't know how to listen to those other two voices. So that's one challenge to begin with. Because what you want to remember is that your greatest victory is your present mood when you're looking for a job and looking to change your life. Your present situation is a bridge, but let's look at it as an adventurous bridge, a challenge that will invigorate you. You're not, and don't just think about money. Money is important. We need it to live, but it's also satisfaction that I'm trying to help people find. And that takes investing in yourself, the time and the money and the energy, whatever it takes. But to begin with, we want to look at happy stories that we're aware of. Throughout history, there are stories of great heroes and so on. You don't want an unhappy story like Ajax coming home from war and falling on his sword. You want the positive story. Hercules, for example, bring it on. Cassandra, for example, predicting the future and getting people to listen to it. Sisyphus, a guy who loved what he's doing. You just have to find the right rock, and we're here to help you find that rock. Mother Teresa, selfless giving. Ulysses, loving to travel and to talk, making his way through by talking. Or Ulysses S. Grant, I'm going to hammer it out on this line if it takes all summer, as he told Lincoln. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, fast on his feet, going from one place to the other, helping all kinds of people. What's your pattern, the one that makes you the most fulfilled? Think about that. It really deserves some of your time, because having figured that out, you'll be able to make your plans better. And along the way, you're going to be able to ally with all kinds of things that help you by identifying the resources around you. General Eisenhower said, you've got to have something in which to believe. You have to have leaders, organization, friendships, and contacts to help you believe that and help you put out your best. But we don't stop at just identifying them. We need to figure out what to do with them. Napoleon said, riches consist not in the possession of treasures, but in the use we make of them. So believing in yourself is a powerful, powerful treasure, and you need to figure out how to do that. Napoleon again said, until you spread your wings, you have no idea how high you can fly. So let's start by being really practical. You need to think about a safety net. What would happen if your attempt to change doesn't work? And think it through. Figure out what the worst case would be and figure out that you could live with that. And then let's forget about the safety net and go for it by making a plan. It's plans that make dreams come true. Strategic goals versus tactical objectives. Happiness itself is not a plan. General Patton says victory is not a plan. What you need is guns, tanks, and supply lines. So solid battle plan, nothing can interfere with your long-term success as long as you recognize that. Whatever happens on a day's basis is just one more thing on the way to success. And keep in mind too, the power of simply repetition, making sure you spend time every day moving your goals ahead in terms of career. If you put a little on a lot, soon it becomes a lot. If you put a little on a little, soon it becomes a lot. So, in other words, is what helps you with your mood, helps you with your motivation. You start doing more, as somebody said, and it will get rid of all the moods you're having. So, and if you a procrastinator, Anthony Robbins said, postpone procrastination. Let's do it now. Just do it, as Nike says. Along the way, controlling your present consciousness is primary. And you can always do that. If you're in a funk, if you're in a big, dark funk, you can get up and run around the block. You can do some exercises, do push-ups, but make sure that you find ways around that if you're serious about your campaign to improve your life. One of the things that you have to remember is to keep your sense of humor. I once had a client who said, I said, how do you manage not to take your situation seriously? And he says, I just refuse to internalize every fucking problem that I've created for myself. And I thought that was hilarious. He never lost his sense of humor. Because after all, it's not a question of surviving for the next 100 years. We all know that. It's a question of surviving day at a time, week at a time, month at a time, and if necessary, hour at a time, So one of the things that I recommend is what I call breakfasting on hope. In the morning, figure out something that you truly enjoy that you're going to do that evening, no matter what. And that will help you get through the day in a tremendous way. In fact, if you figure it out the night before, you'll spring out of bed because you know the day's going to end well, no matter what bumps you hit along the way. Enjoy those bumps, by the way, because after all, you're a soldier, you're a battler. And that engagement, the path itself, is part of the challenge. St. Catherine of Siena said, all the way to heaven is heaven. And people wondered what she meant, but she meant that every day that you live struggling for a goal, that struggle is the goal. And that struggle has the same satisfaction that the goal will have. And of course, you want to take time to get away from the pressure if it's too much. Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. But I would rather put it this way, when you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen for the time being. Go on a fishing trip, take a day off, walk around the block, whatever you can afford to do to get away. But don't give up the quest, don't give up the goals. Keep yourself healthy, sound mind and a sound body. Keep your discipline from the service in keeping yourself healthy, because if you're feeling good, you're going to think better and you're going to present yourself better. And keeping track of things, by the way, is a great strategy as you're going along this path. That's why prisoners even keep track of the days, even though it doesn't seem to have any particular meaning, but it does. It gives them control over their environment. So yeah, keep a log, keep a captain's log, keep a lieutenant's log, keep whatever kind of log you want to call it, but that will help you look back on how you're making it through this obstacle course that's life. Ignore ups and downs. That's what the Zen thing meant. Don't get too excited if you win something. Don't get too excited if you lose something. Keep an even temper. Think of it as a game, because in fact, life really is a game. When you compare to what's going on 65 million light years distant in a far galaxy, what we do here is a game that we take seriously and that we play to win. But nonetheless, give yourself that perspective. And use your discipline to resist the need for short-term gratification, just as to show who's the boss. You don't need to always be happy. You don't need to eat all the time. And along the way, identify unhelpful images. Do you think the wolf is at the door? Okay, I used to think that once in a while when I was just starting out. And what I did is I went to the front door, looked out, I saw no wolves, so I continued doing the risky thing I was attempting to do. Think about all the negative images that your parents or your past experience have implanted in your mind, and make sure that you find a way of dealing with them. Like my father used to tell me, a rolling stone gathers no moss, and that made me feel bad until I started thinking about it, and I thought, wait, is moss a good thing? You know, is that what I'm supposed to be gathering? Because I did a lot of traveling in my life, and that's what he said. Well, he liked to stay home. I like to travel. It's got nothing to do with what's good and what's bad. It's a question of what makes you happy. So you need to identify not only the potential allies in your quest, but also the ones that are not doing you well, things that friends can say things that set you back. You need to make a list of true friends who encourage you to move forward and perhaps take risks, and friends who actually are afraid of doing that, and so they try to instill fear in you. That's one of the things you've got to look at. And along the way, if you've got some crazy dream, like I've never flown a plane before, but I want to do this flight for United Airlines, you've got to ask yourself, what are the odds of my getting to do that at my age, whatever your age is? And you have to tell yourself, if you're going to succeed at finding your right livelihood, the odds don't apply to me. That's all. They don't apply to me. That is a great strategy. When it comes to getting rejected, no one can reject you except yourself. And rejection and failure are signs of success. No one who's ever succeeded at anything has succeeded without failure. Failure is a leap forward. And what I always tell people who work for me is just fail as quickly as you can. Because if you're smart, you'll correct your course when you fail. If you're not smart and you keep failing, that's a different issue, but I know that's not you. So failure is almost as good as success because it teaches you how to succeed. If you get discouraged, think about this definition, that success is nothing but continued progress toward a worthy goal. And one strategy that will help you is to ask people for their advice, not for their help. People can always help you if they want to, they won't be shy, but their advice is invaluable and most people are happy to give it and will give it. Think about your relationship with time because so many people are not using time properly. They're trying to manage their work and guess what? You can't manage work because it's infinite. Good work creates more good work. Bad work creates more work, but you can't control time because time is infinite. Time is finite. You can control time. So find a way of figuring out your attention span, like you're going to give, let's say, 1 hour every day to working on your resume, going out there and looking for jobs through the internet, especially. But you can't take more than 1 hour because you've got other pressures, you've got to deal with them. And if you schedule more than 1 hour for that purpose, you end up not doing the hour. Figure out what is the attention span that you can afford. Take an inventory of what you're actually doing with your time and how much of it, A, is productive financially, B, makes you happy. And finally, a time suggestion, use a stopwatch to guarantee that you'll spend the time that you've decided on every day doing something. Don't go by the clock on the wall or the clock on your wrist. Use a stopwatch, which I do. And there are a lot of tricks that we know today that we didn't used to know. Meditation, which is, to me, having that managing editor part of your mind standing on a bridge, watching all the swirl of things go by as your mind continues chattering to itself, whether it's dreaming or whether it's scheming to get you to do something more practical. Meditate, stand on the bridge above it, and you'll take control of it. Don't worry about waiting, because I don't believe in waiting. While you're waiting for an answer from something, do other things. And that way, one of the other things may blossom before you even get an answer and you have more options. I never forget a guru I heard once when one of the people in his audience said, "Master, how many times can I pick myself up?" Because he told people to pick themselves up when they fail. And he asked her, "Sister, how many times can you fail?" Which I thought was brilliant. As many times as you can fail, you can pick up, you can keep going. Failure is just falling forward. So by way of summary, there are 3 important things to remember when you deal with your career story. The first one is that you are in charge. You are the one. You are the quarterback of your team. Though others may help you along the way, and you should take their advice, no one is going to carry the ball for you. Number 2, create a plan. Happiness is not a plan. You need more detail. And number 3, never forget to live and enjoy the moment. Live in the now. As an aspiring actress who lived next door to me once said, and I told her, how can you handle yet another audition today when you've had a run of turndowns? She goes, you know what? If worse comes to worse, I'm happy now. And I loved her spirit because she was determined to enjoy life, whether she was succeeding that day or not. So really, she was succeeding. And don't forget the military school formula that I've heard others in this webinar talk about. Integrity first, service before self, and excellence. And finally, as my mother always told me, go for it. For your attention, I'd love to hear your questions, issues, challenges, and I'll turn it back to David so he can open the door to that.
Thank you, Ken. Very well done. Scott, you're with us?
I am here.
So questions from the group?
Let's ask the group right now. If you want to raise your hand and ask a question, there's a raise your hand function on the panel, or you can chat or type your questions in.
Ken, I'll start it off, Ken.
Yeah.
Find that, you have to, I always, as a writer, divided my life into my economic activity and my uneconomic activity. And I think we seem to get overwhelmed by the economic part and never really have an uneconomic kind of thing that could turn into economic. So the thing is, career change, often we have to live a double life because we have to make money and support ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we should forget. We got to continue to think about where we want to go, even if we have these stop gaps and I think it's important to talk about that because things start out uneconomic and they don't look practical, and the more time you put into it, you can really it's amazing how it all works out.
Yeah, David, that brings up a great question. Remember, I talked about the voices in your head. Well, one of the voices in your head is that accountant. And that accountant is always saying, don't waste 1 minute that isn't earning money for you. When you say, I really would like to sit in the park and think for half an hour about what would make me happy, the accountant will do anything to stop that from happening because it's a nightmare for the accountant. But the visionary is the part of you that wanted to do that. So what I mean by planning is you sit down, the managing editor, that third part of your mind that hears the other two, says, let's make a plan. But let's work this out, guys. How about if we spend 1 hour every day thinking about careers and no more than that on a stopwatch? I promise. I'm back to work. I'll take my lunch hour. I won't eat, or I'll eat while I'm thinking. And you have to make that accommodation to your future and to your happiness. And you tell the accountant, by the way, this will motivate me more to work better. So please give me a break. You let me take a lunch hour. Why can't I take a lunch hour and do this project? So at the beginning of the career change or the career chase or whatever it is, you take an hour and later on negotiate for more time as signs of success start coming in, and even the accountant can see them. And that's how you prioritize it. But to not take that hour, it means you're going to be feeling regret and weird kind of despair that you're not doing anything to satisfy your soul, like you are with your writing. I used to have a client who, she was so crazed in her life between her children, her husband, and her work that she, in her car at lunch hour every day, she had a 45-minute lunch hour, and she kept a tiny computer in her car and parked in a far part of the parking lot. So she got her exercise, walking to the car, sitting in the car, working on the computer on her novel. And within a year, she finished the novel. And there's an example of what the human mind can do if it has this conversation with itself and says, look, all I'm asking for is 45 minutes. But you owe it to yourself. You basically owe it to yourself. But to the accountant in your mind, not to exceed the 45 minutes until a deal is struck later to expand that. And one of the things I say about every plan is that a good plan includes a regular time in which the plan should be revisited and revised. Because if you don't have that regular time, you're going to defeat yourself with your plan, because at some point you'll fail your plan plan will fail you. But by putting that into the plan, like we'll do what I'm doing now, this is the pattern I'm going to do for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, I'm going to revisit and revise the plan. You understand?
Yes, and I've been quoting you, Ken, for many years about the 10-hour number. I would tell people, put 10 hours a week into your dream. If you get to Sunday and you've only worked 6, you got 4 hours to do. I mean, it's that really helped me, because it's amazing how cumulative it becomes over time. You really, yeah.
Yeah, if you have if you really fall in love with the stopwatch method, which I did, I have many stopwatches around here. Use one stopwatch to keep your weekly time on, and one stopwatch for your daily stint. And when you finish that hour, you'll notice that you now have already done 4 hours on the weekly stopwatch. Until you get that to 10, you're not going to stop. And the cool thing about the stopwatch, as opposed to the clock on the wall, is you can do that work any time of day, whatever you can steal it. That chapter in one of my books I call Stealing Time. and use the stopwatch to steal it. Because that clock on the wall is controlled by outside forces that you often have no control over. We all know how that is. We have a plan to go do something, and 300 things suddenly step in front of the plan between us, and we don't get it done. But you can always steal some time if you use the stopwatch as your right-hand weapon. It's in one of my books, I call it Mercury's magic wand.
It can be a lonely path, and but what I found is in this world, it's very interesting because you think like in New York that everybody, you know, with the Ivy League degree is going to get the jobs. You know, I went to a state school, no one knows about it. You know, I'm not going to get that job. But you have to remember that there are people out there that are at the top of the business that went to a state school or were in the army. And you'd be surprised how many people recognize themselves in you. And if you can connect with just one of those people that see themselves in you, and I believe me, it's worked for a lot of people with me. I've seen my former younger selves in them, and I've tried to help them. So
right, and David, that's the truth of that is that when somebody is hiring or helping someone form a new business, for example, they're buying this gal's story.
right.
They're buying the person. And things like what school they went to drop away into unimportance, especially remind yourselves that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates never even finished college, right? Many of the greatest thinkers of all time and greatest achievers didn't finish formal education. So that shouldn't even be a consideration. It's like, who am I right now, and how I tell myself, how can I make myself necessary to this organization that I'm trying to get hired by, or how can I find my own way of life? And one of my clients we just book for, called Piece of Cake, was tired of working for other people. She had done some jobs, but she sat down with her girlfriend one weekend. They decided to lock themselves up for the weekend and not leave until they figured out what to do with their lives. What they decided to do by the end of the weekend was to bake cakes. And it occurred to them at the very last hour of the weekend that neither one of them ever baked a cake in her life. So they realized they're going to have to do things differently, backwards. They started marketing on Monday. By Friday, they had something like 30 orders already. So they ran down to the supermarket and bought cake mixes and cake pans. They got the wrong ones because they didn't read the recipes, and so they had to go back and get new cake pans. And they started baking cakes. 2 years into it, as she had sold hundreds and hundreds of cakes, the great breakthrough came that, hey, you can use more than one oven. You can bake more than one cake at a time. Long story short, in today's world, she's got 8 shops open in Atlanta called Piece of Cake, including at the Atlanta airport. And she did this because 2 things. She liked to make people happy. She figured that out about herself. And she knew that it was very hard for any human being to resist or turn down a piece of cake. So that's how she started her company. Yeah, Piece of Cake. And, you know, there are many examples in America, from Colonel Sanders to, you know, Fields Cookies, Miss Fields Cookies, about people who just figured out what to do on their own because they weren't happy in a job. So there's 2 kinds of people: the one who wants a fulfilling job because they like to be part of an organization, and the other person who isn't comfortable with that, wants to do it on their own. Whichever one you are, you owe it to yourself to take that hour in the park and give it some time to think about it. It won't take you many sessions, believe me, before it occurs to you. And by the way, you can fail if you decide this is what you do and it isn't really what you do. The park is always there. You can always revise your plan. And today, where changing careers used to be an exception to the rule, today it is normal for people to change careers. So you're in the mix with the right people. And one of the ironies I've told you before, talked about before, is that there are hundreds of major corporations in this country who are dying to find people like you, vets. Why? Because the vet automatically comes with responsibility, service, fitting into an organization, reliability, duty. I mean, those terms are almost unknown in civilian life today, but they're part of your everyday life in the service. And so their frustration is they can't find you. No, you are frustrated because you can't find the right job. They are frustrated because they can't find the right you. So you need to figure out, how do we build that bridge? And that's, part of what I do is help people figure that out.
So Ken, my point about the college is just that's the accounting thinking. That's the accountant saying, always raising, well, you can't be this, you can't be that. And all I'm saying is, having gotten to 61 and hired people for many years in New York, I tend to think that most people underestimate their talents. And I think if you're going to do any estimation of your talents, overestimate them. Don't underestimate. I find way too many people look at their lives and they underestimate the opportunities in front of them. And I'd rather have them go the other way. And then the last thing I want to say, just about going out and trying to find that opportunity, don't waste too much time on unreceptive people, because you go through 10 people and then you find that one person that just understands you and you have this chemistry and you're off to the races. So rather than try to waste too much time on someone that's not, you just don't have that good feeling, it's better just to keep moving on.
Yeah, you should use the word next. Next. Let's just keep going. Don't dwell on failure. Also, David, something you raise has to do with confidence. Like when you underestimate yourself, it's because you don't have enough confidence in yourself. And let me tell you, the most successful people in the world are suffering from the same thing you might be suffering from. LOSC, as I call it, lack of self-confidence. But here's the difference. They do not let that stop them. They do not let that stop them. They pretend that they're confident, and it works. You can become more confident, by the way, when you pretend you're confident and something works, and now you have something to be confident about. But think about it. It's your mind that's telling you you're not confident enough to do this, and you can trick your mind if you become aware of what it's doing to you. And that's part of what we try to help people understand, is your mind is playing tricks on you, literally. So, by the way, get to be a better trickster and trick it back so it can get you where you want to go. Pretend you're confident even if you're not. Thing called the Imposter Syndrome. I've never done this before, so I'm not really sure I'm very good at it. Okay, guess what? Nobody who's ever made a breakthrough has ever done it before. So the Imposter Syndrome is a sign of something good happening. And you just need to deal with it. Pretend you're not an imposter, even if you think you are or feel you are. And these are all parts of how the mind has to work, with itself, against itself, to make you move forward. And it's, our self-consciousness is, if you can do all of that and stay cheerful, then you're having a good day.
Nice response to that. We'll go to Scott now and his questions.
Great.
Scott?
Yeah. I'm going to call on Richard. I'm going to unmute you, Richard, and hopefully you can ask your question.
Ken, can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for that excellent presentation, and thank you for being so positive on the presentation and throughout the years. I'm a veteran and also an employer, and I've interviewed many applicants who want to work for my small company. Now, when somebody comes in and I look at their resume and they have that they're in the military, I ask them about it, and I'm somewhat impressed, and that's a plus. But what is really important to me is if they will somehow tell me about the lessons they learned in the military. You touched on some discipline, time, but I guess my question is, how would you advise people to weave that in to the conversation when they're applying for a job?
Richard, that's a great question, and I appreciate your answering it. There's coaches who teach people how to appear on television or appear at any interview will always tell you that the interviewer is there to ask questions and to gather information. You are there to get your purpose across. So you need to get your points across no matter what you're asked, take charge of the interview, and do it subtly and politely, of course, but take charge of it. And that's going to impress the interviewer, by the way. So when it comes up from the interview, when you're in the interview, you know that your military service is a plus. You would be foolish to leave that interview without letting the interviewer know that too. So you simply look for any hook that can come up from the interviewer where you could say, yeah, when I was in the service, one of the things I learned, which I didn't even believe in at the beginning, but then I really learned the importance of it, was punctuality. And it makes me crazy when people just show up late for a meeting or show up late for anything. I mean, you can't show up late for a battle unless you're planning to lose the battle. So you just look for hooks and entry points where you can insert your service and whatever, listen carefully. A lot of people don't listen. They work themselves up into a frenzy and they do maybe a great presentation. I learned long ago not to take certain writers into pitch meetings because they never stop talking. But the most important thing going on in the meeting, other than getting your purpose done, is how your audience is responding. So listen to your audience, see what he or she is really looking for, and find a hook to mention your service and how it relates to it. Because I can't imagine an employer who doesn't value military service as automatically telling me that this candidate has got a bunch of things that I have to worry about when it comes to other candidates who are not in that service. Just look for hooks. David, are there other questions?
Yeah, we'll get
Yeah.
more. And Ken, I'll
Thank you,
also
Richard.
ask- Yep.
Thank you, Richard.
Sure.
Thank you, Richard. Great question. Scott's getting another question. I
Yeah.
can't. Yep, Scott.
Okay, yeah, this is a great one from the audience, I thought. It's a bit long, so bear with me. When you're starting out, it sometimes feels like you have to define yourself and stick with it these days. So it feels impossible to pick one way in when a few dozen areas interest you. Say, I absolutely love working in development, but distribution also interests me. And being on set reminds me of being deployed, so I love it in a whole different way, like going home for the holidays. How do you pick somewhere to start when you enjoy a bunch of aspects of a certain business? Niche is king these days. How do we combat that fear of choosing wrong internally?
Well, that's a great question. A question that really applies to my life because I've always spent all my waking effort to not be pigeonholed and niched in a place, but didn't make me happy because I like to do many things. And but the answer is that any entry point can work. So don't worry about that too much. In other words, if you don't know in the industry you're in whether you want to be on the assembly line or in the design room or in the marketing office, just get in, and during the first time that you're there, figure out how the whole place works. And when you figure that out, go to human resources, for example, make an appointment and say, here's the thing, I got into design, but I really think that my best service to this company would be in marketing because you're a good salesman and you love cars. So I think that any way in works, and you don't have to worry about that. You're the only one who can pigeonhole yourself, even when everybody else is trying to. And I know that from the clients I've dealt with over the years who do not want to be pigeonholed, and some of them are very happy to be pigeonholed because they can make more money if they continue doing the same kind of thing over and over again, and they're perfectly happy doing that. But many like me and are worried about being pigeonholed, especially as some of you may be experiencing being put in the wrong spot. You can change your spots.
And a follow-up question to that, Ken, is let me just summarize this. You are mentioning a bunch of techniques that someone can use when they know what their dream path is in order to further it and stay on target. but do you have any specific sort of techniques that would help someone go through the process of figuring out what their dream path might even look like amongst a bunch of different options they might have?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there are official techniques. There's a thing called the Minnesota Aptitude you can probably find on the internet that which are often given by placement offices at college, even high schools, that makes a list of all the kind of activities that people do and gets you to react to how you feel about these different things. And it's a voluminous test because it asks the same question in maybe 5 or 6 different ways throughout the test because it wants to really find the truth. And then it gives you a profile of what what you're like and what you would make you the most comfortable. But I always say there's no substitute for just plain sitting in the park and thinking, because you can do this analysis yourself and probably more accurately because it's you thinking about what you love and what you hate, what you don't like. Make a list of what I like, what I don't like, what makes me happiest, what doesn't make me happiest. There was a book I read years ago by a woman named Marcia Senator that's called Do Love, the Money Will Follow. And it's absolutely true. If you are lucky enough to find the thing you love most, in my case, dealing with stories and with people, with storytellers, money will find its way to you. And how much money? Well, that's another question you ask during your sit in the park. You ask yourself, how much do I need? Do I need a boat? Do I need 2 boats? Do I need a plane? Do I need 3 houses? What do I need? I mean, even Warren Buffett is happy with, 10 suits or 6 suits, whereas others might have hundreds of them. People can only wear so many clothes, eat so much food, live in so many places, and you have to figure that out for yourself. Be honest with yourself. No one could grill you like you grill yourself. And here's the thing, I'm trying to make that process a conscious one for you, because unconsciously, that's what you're doing when you wake up in the middle of the night with all kinds of voices going on in your mind and disturbing your sleep. Your mind is working whether you're in charge of it or not. That's the scary thing about the human mind. So take charge of it and analyze it, and you'll see what you come up with. I mean, make your own profile of your strengths, your weaknesses, what makes you happy, what doesn't make you happy, how much money you need, what you don't need. And of course, relating that to the people in your life. Some people are individuals, some people have families. You need to take all that into consideration, but you can do it if you give yourself the mental space to do it, which many people do not. They do not give themselves the time, and they run around truly like a rat on a treadmill, and that's not good. We want to stop that. We want people to be happy. Thank you for it.
Yeah, that was a good answer. I have another question from the audience. Thank you, audience. These are great. While making the transition from military to civilian life, and when you don't have a network in your chosen industry, where does one even start? Also, a follow-up question is, could you share a few techniques to manage time better when it comes to writing?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to. Like, one of the first steps through in time management is to figure out your attention span. When I was a professor, a student would come to me and say, I'm failing history and I really don't get it because I am spending more time on history than on any other subject. So how much time are you spending? I'm spending 3 hours a day just on history, every day, 1 day off a week. And I started thinking to myself, 3 hours a day? And I discovered that during those 3 hours, the person is actually not studying history most of the time. They're studying history for maybe 20 minutes, and then their mind starts wandering. And because I put people through a drill to find out what are you actually doing with your time. And by readjusting that pattern down to fewer hours, 45 minutes a day instead of 6 hours, focusing on doing it properly, we learned that this person was exceeding her attention span for history, whereas now she has to really work in a focused way on the 45 minutes she's got every day for history, and her grades improved. And I learned that attention span is one of our biggest challenges. We all think that, oh, if I had more time, I could do whatever, I could write more. It's not true. Actually, if you had less time and you were organized about it, you could write more. So start out by figuring out attention span. Then learn that there are 3 kinds of time that applies to anything. First time, middle time, and last time. First time is excitement, inspiration, can't wait to sit down, blurt it all out, and not wanting it to end, which is itself suspicious, because if you do continue, you will defeat yourself. You need to limit the time you spend, concentrate the energy. Second time, middle time, is the time where it's really hard to stay focused and disciplined. And we'll get to that in a minute. We'll talk about final time, last time next. Last time is when you can see the goal line and you want to race toward it. You're filled with energy, similar to that in first time, and you get to conclude it. So the trick is make first time a little bit longer. Let's talk about compartments of time, like say a 2-hour writing session during the beginning of your project, and a 2-hour session toward the end during last time. But in the middle, make the compartments smaller, so small that part of you rebels against them being so small. Because if you force yourself to stop writing after, let's say, 60 minutes, then your brain is very upset and will spend the rest of the day revising what you wrote, thinking of things to write tomorrow, getting more organized, getting more focused, and then you sit down for that 1 hour tomorrow and the brain is ready to go. There's no startup time required. So analyzing time carefully, I've come up with all these different, concepts about it that help people use it more effectively. And you have to be aware of them in your own life, because whether you're aware of them or not, they are true. Like if you give yourself unlimited time to work on a project, guess what? The rest of your brain and life will do. It will come up with 100 obstacles to doing that. It's the old sharpening your pencil syndrome of, I sit down to write, but then I realize my pencil's not sharp. In those days when they had pencils and we had pencil sharpeners, and then I have to go up and fix that. And I also have to rearrange my desk. And you know what? Maybe I should repaint this room. This is how the accountant in your brain tries to stop the visionary from getting anything done. So it's self-awareness and analysis of time, figuring out where you're actually spending time, where can you steal time. Some people are completely oblivious to how much time they spend either on the phone or in social messaging. And I guess that Instagram has a new mechanism on it that lets you limit the time you spend on it. So I tell it, buzz me when I spend more than 10 minutes a day on Instagram or Twitter, because I don't want to spend more time than that. And it's you, the managing editor inside you, that is in charge here. Don't let the accountant who wants you to work yourself to the bone, or the visionary who wants you to just pipe dream. Don't let them take over. Make sure you're in charge of your mind and get it working together. So yeah, that's a good question. Time is a obsession with mine. I always love the old Spanish saying that there's more, that life is short, time is short, but wide. When you see, people say, how do you get all these things done? Well, because I do them. And I once asked a friend of mine whether he ever spent an hour just sitting in a chair doing nothing. And he said, oh, all the time. I spend 5 hours doing that. And I thought, boy, if I do that once a week, it's amazing. And that's when I'm in the park thinking about what do I want to change in my life and how do I want to go about that. So self-awareness, one thing I learned in school a long time ago is something that an ancient philosopher once said, this: the unexamined life is not worth living. You need to examine your life. Don't be afraid, face it, figure out like, okay, it got me to here. how do I make it work better for me going forward? So examine time, examine your life, examine your relationship to time. And that's a good question. It gets me going.
I want to add
Yeah.
one on. Dan,
Well,
I want to add to that just for a sec. I often find that my best ideas don't come when I'm sitting down trying to get great ideas. Go out for a walk, go for a run, do whatever you have to do and let the ideas rise up.
David, that is a perfect illustration of one of my rules for writers, or really for doing anything, is never sit down to write until you know what you're going to write before you sit down. Because if you do that, if you let your walks and your sleep, even your dreams, if you let your drives from here to there be the primary place where your brain is free to come up with new character points and new scenes, instead of having to do it facing a blank screen, you'll never have writer's block. That is what all the great writers did. Somebody asked William Saroyan once, is it true that you typed, that you wrote the Human Comedy, one of his, in 3 days? And he said, well, no, that's not really true. It took me my whole life to write it, but I typed it out in 3 days. Is that what you mean? Meaning that when he sat down, he was ready and he just did it. But he got all those ideas on the train, on the plane, on the walks, swimming, etc. And so, David, you're absolutely right. That's an example of your mind being forced to abandon the process itself. And when it has to abandon it because you've told it it has to, then it starts throwing stuff at you until it's helped you put it all together to make it easy to transcribe it.
And you leave the accountant at home, right, Ken? You leave the accountant at home.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the accountant is hopefully not on duty when you're walking along the beach, and that's when you can get, the work done. But if you told the accountant, by the way, I'm going to walk around the beach, along the beach until I figure out this whole novel, it will stop you. I guarantee it will find ways to stop you from doing that. You have to put a limit on it. Like Sunday, we're going to the beach for a couple of hours. Okay, the accountant can handle that. But if you say, I'm going to walk along the beach until this is finished. I was once invited to a cabin for the summer because I was in the middle of a book, and they said, why don't you come finish your book at the cabin? Perfect. I love it. This is before I knew all this stuff. And I went to the cabin, and, I ended up repainting the cabin, cutting the grass, redoing the dock, cleaning up the boats and working on the boats, fishing a lot. And 4 weeks had gone by. I hadn't done a single thing on the book because I wasn't managing time. And you need to manage your time. For example, when it comes to the plan that I keep talking about, you need to write down in your calendar, I'm going to revise this plan 2 weeks from now, and put it in the calendar on a certain day. 10 o'clock that day, I'm going to revise the plan. I'm giving myself an hour, or whatever you want to give yourself, to do that. And that way, you're in control. Your managing editor is in control, and you can put your whole heart into everything you're doing until that day. Then you revise the plan. But if you don't have a consistent pattern to that, then your mind just kind of goes wild and into free spinning craziness and counterproductivity.
Excellent. And I did want to point out that that's a great answer, Ken and David. I did also want to point out that question had two parts. And the first part was, while making the transition from military to civilian life in your chosen, and you don't have a network in your chosen industry, where does one even start?
Thank you for bringing back my short range memory. Sorry about not answering that second part. Well, in the 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would have been harder to answer that question. But in today's world, the answer is you start with Google, because the whole world is at your fingertips. You can find out anything. So whatever you need to research, you do it online. If you need to take a course that helps you figure out the networking, you can take that online. If you just any question you can ask me. Google's now so sophisticated that you could just type out your question and it'll answer your question. It'll give you ideas. And you simply sit there and also limit your time. Like, I'm going to research for 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day until I figure out an entry into this business. And one of the things I mentioned earlier in passing is that ask people as advice. Tell people, like, find out somebody you know or somebody you can reach out to and say, look, I'm totally unfamiliar with this business. How do people get started? Can I get your advice on that? For example, in the business I'm in now, the entertainment business, people take internships or apprenticeships. And in those internships and apprenticeships, as happened in the trades back in the Middle Ages, since the Middle Ages, you get to learn how the whole thing works, who the players are, how to reach the players, etc. And it's never been easier. No matter what your situation is, you can get access to a computer and go for it. Just the world is at your fingertips.
And I will say that business is about starting conversations. So if you can sell anything. And if you're the kind of person that can go up to someone and start a conversation on the street, then you have a gift and you should be using that.
Exactly. That's one of your assets that you'd be listing. I have a friend who, I don't even ask him to pick me up at the airport anymore because he can't. It takes us an hour to get out of the airport after we're in his car because he talks to the ticket taker in the parking lot. He talks to everybody he runs across on the way to the car. He just loves to talk. Yeah, and I keep telling him, you should be in a business where you're talking all day.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, I have a hand up in the audience. I'm going to unmute Larry. Larry, are you there to ask your question?
Mute. Okay, I'm unmuted.
Great.
Yeah. Again, I want to thank you for again hosting this great webinar, and Ken, appreciate everything that you're saying. One of the things you talked about was developing a career story, and one of the major components of that is living in the moment. And I really thought about that as you were saying it and how it applies to veterans specifically, because so often veterans are not living in the moment. They're living in the past, and they have regrets that they're dealing with, maybe as a result of their military service, and in turn fears of the future. It's interesting that this came up because I recently did a Google search myself on living in the moment and how to live in the moment. It led me to an article, and Ken, you'll appreciate this. It was an article about Bill Murray. And because I don't think there's much of an example of someone who lives in the moment, more so than Bill Murray. The stories of his spontaneous hijinks are legend, of course. What advice do you have for veterans to help them live in the moment? Because I never, even with my Google search, got a thorough answer as to how to live in the moment.
That is a great question that affects everybody in the world at all times. We humans, with our enormous brains, tend to live in the future and in the past, and therefore we miss the only place where there is life, really is life, right this moment. And so I can go on forever about this, and I'll try to give you a relatively short response. The first thing you have to do is go back to the sitting in the park metaphor. You need to sit in the park, and let's say you've got troubles that were so complicated and so on that they woke you up last night. Find a peaceful place, no matter where it is. It could be in the park. It could be in a crowded cafe. I go there to think sometimes because just seeing other people gives me perspective, and I feel peaceful there. Go wherever you consider a peaceful moment and ask yourself this question. Is there anything wrong now? I mean, right this moment. And I would venture to say that 90%, 99% of our time, the answer is no, there's nothing wrong now. But if I something. There'll be something wrong tomorrow or a week from now, or maybe even, 2 hours from now, but there's nothing wrong right now. And when you think about it, animals like squirrels, that's where they live. They live in the present. They're not thinking about dying. They're not thinking about their achievements in the past. They're not thinking about what I could have done better back then or this awful thing that happened. When you let that happen to you, you are taking yourself away from life itself, which is in the present. Eckhart Tolle wrote a great book about this called The Power of Now, which I heartily recommend to everybody because it is filled with ideas of how to get yourself into the now. And you need to learn to not only recognize the now and that there is nothing wrong right now, you need to enjoy it. You need to embrace it. You need to, no matter what's going on, if you're in the middle of a really tangled mess, probably of your own making, that's okay, because life is just a question of going through one mess after the other and getting better at it. One of the consolations of getting older is you get better at the messes that you make and that you encounter. But you got to start with, I can do this. And who is doing this? The managing editor, the part of your mind that is above the fray, that is on that bridge looking down at all the other stuff going on in your mind, is okay in the present, looking at trees, looking at the squirrels going by, looking at the people going by. That is life. And everything else is a mental construct. Faulkner once said, there is no such thing as was. If was existed, there would be no grief or sorrow. And what he meant was the past is so present in our mind that we can never say it was. It still is. It's in our minds, and it's knocking us out. And so is the future with all our possible. Those are worries, anxieties, all the things that could go wrong. And guess what? As you go on in life, most of the things that could go wrong do not go wrong, despite Murphy's Law. So getting into the present is something you've got to train yourself for. And that's why I mentioned meditation, because meditation is all about being in the present. It works for some people, focus meditation, like David Lynch's foundation is all about, which works with veterans as well as with school kids and all kinds of groups that it is very, very good for. But there's also unfocused meditation. Just go sit, next to a fountain somewhere and do nothing. The minute a thought comes to your mind, just get rid of the thought and go back to looking at the water flowing in the fountain. And you'll discover that you are in the now and that there's nothing wrong in the now. And that gives you the energy to get up and do something about whatever you decide is important to do. But most important is giving yourself the time every day to be in the now. I hope that touches on your question at least.
It does, Ken, and I really appreciate that very thorough answer. And I also appreciate the reference for the book. Appreciate it.
I want to add something, Larry. I ran into this bloke named Wim Hof, Wimhoff, swimming in freezing water. He's called the Iceman, and apparently he can control his core temperature through breathing and meditation. It's an incredible, just check it out and how he transforms himself. It's an extreme example, but very interesting.
Excellent.
I'm going to look at it, David, but I am not going to swim in freezing water. No matter
Well, you're
what you
out
say.
in California, Ken.
Well, the Pacific is pretty cold, I'll tell you.
That's my point. Over to you, Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to just point out that somebody in the audience sent in a great comment about the previous question in regards to networks and networking. And it is this: there are also veterans organizations that can provide a network of diverse individuals that can be tapped into. So in regard to supplementing with Google, reaching out to the veterans organizations as a network building exercise. I thought that was a great point. So thank you for that.
That's a great, in my father's generation and since, veterans who belonged to organizations had regular gatherings, they had parties, they had fairs, they had carnivals, they had outings with the kids. And that camaraderie, just being among people, even if it's not focused, is irreplaceable, as you guys know, as everybody knows. But it's also, if you just Googled in, where can vets go to get X or Y, you'll see that there are lots of resources available to you. And if you don't have a computer, just go to a library and use the computer there. The world is at your fingertips this way, even through your cell phone, of course. And I think that reaching out for a group, I mean, I have a little problem with some groups that what you don't want to do is be part of a group that is basically complaining all the time. You want to make sure you're part of a positive group. And so you should look at every group with, as an approval situation, like they're on approval until you've been to a meeting or two and decided if they give you positive reinforcement or negative, because I've seen a lot of groups just bring everybody down. They have a down meeting. That's not of any use. To me, that's a waste of time. You want a group that fills you with energy and makes you want to go out there and knock them dead and, get something done, make yourself feel better.
Thank you. Great. I have another question here. With COVID-19 halting business and industry on almost every front, that leaves millions of people looking for jobs at the same time. How can we stand apart when we're fresh to a new career field, especially if we do not have a lot of experience on our resume?
Well, that goes directly to one of the statements I made. You've got to tell yourself the odds don't apply to you. So whenever you run into a generalization about the impact of COVID-19, whatever, that's my answer to it. Like, there are those who are going forward despite it, and there are those who are stalled because of it. But if you're truly focused on what you want to get done, you will not let anything stop you, including COVID-19. You'll do a workaround. I always loved the character of Radar in MASH because he always had a workaround for anything. And that's the way you've got to be about your own career. You whatever is out there challenging you, it's just one of the obstacles that you have to go through. But it's nothing's going to stop you. As I said earlier, nothing can stop the long-range goal if you deal with things on a daily basis and through a plan that you've got, which includes revise the plan, because something unexpected comes up, you make a note for when you're revising the plan, you got to consider this too. So COVID-19 is, in some ways, it's a maybe overall negative, certainly for those who get it, but in other ways, it's a positive because it's forcing us all to evolve, and evolution, change, is a sign of life. If you're not changing, then you're not as alive as you could be. So I love helping people change.
Excellent. Thank you.
When
Okay,
I was
the
a
next
professor,
question.
When I was a professor, I had a colleague who said, "Atchity, remember two things. There's nothing new under the sun, and people never change." And I can tell you, I avoided him most of my academic career because I thought that was just a pitiful way of looking at life. I mean, choose the people who's looking at life the way you want to look at life, and not people who say there's no such thing as, people never change.
Back to you, Ken, for closing remarks.
Well, thank you for your time today, and I'm very interested in helping you. So we would love any kind of comments that you want to send in. David will give you the right contact information, and wish you the very best with what you're doing. But keep in mind the last things I talked about, which is that you are in charge of this, and you are going to succeed if you make a plan, because the plan is what makes dreams come true. And you will succeed happily, not even suffering along the way, if you find a way of living in the moment, living in the now, and relishing the challenges that you're set before yourself. The greatest challenges in life are ones that you set for yourself, and you need to learn how to enjoy them as opposed to suffering through them. So those are my parting remarks, and along with go for it. You can do it. You can change your life for better. You can find a better job, or you can find a right livelihood that doesn't involve working for anyone else, because this is America, and at least so far, anything is possible in this country. We reward free enterprise. We reward determination. We reward independent thinking, and never be afraid of failing. Just go for it, and good luck.
Thank you, Ken. We'll be following up for everyone's very valuable feedback, and we're going to be doing more of these, and we'll be bringing Ken back to you again. So please stay with us. Continue to please, the replay will be available, and please, everybody knows someone that wasn't on this call today, I'm sure, that would benefit from Ken's advice. So please extend the network. Wish you all a very pleasant weekend, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you, David, and thanks everybody for coming along. Take care. Stay safe.